Hi, this video is a tutorial on how to create classic drum machine clap sounds using OSnap. We're gonna create clap which sound like this, then we're gonna see how to improve on that and get claps which sound like this or this. Let's get into it. If you take a look at the waveforms from classic clap sounds from iconic drum machines, you can see that there is a pattern in the waveform. You've got a series of spikes followed by a long hit. The pattern is the same between all those samples, however we can see differences in spike length and spike amplitude, as well as spike spacing. You can see that on the 707 the spikes are fairly consistent in volume. They're also equally spaced, whereas on the 808 you can see that the gap here and here is fairly similar, but the gap between the last spike and the main hit is smaller. You can also see on the 909 that there's a slight decrease in volume and the long hit is way quieter than the initial spike. On the Vermona you can see that the initial spike is quite a long one. Those two short ones are really close together. There's a long one right before the long impact, and you can also see the variation in volume between the spikes here. So let's try and recreate this. To create their clap sounds, this drum machine use white noise as their sound source. So let's create our first spike using the noise engine in OSnap. One really important thing to make sure here is that the auto align impact toggle here is deactivated. Since we're gonna be using many layers to create our individual spikes, we don't want the plugin to automatically align them, since the principle of this synthesis technique is to have offsetted impacts in time. So make sure this one is deactivated. So for settings here, you'll want the noise color to be somewhere between 0% and -100%, -100% being a pure white noise and 0% being a blend of pink noise and white noise. So here pick a value that sounds right for you. For the stereo width, we'll stick to 0% and we'll use no stutter at all. So we'll keep the amount at 0%. Then the important thing here is to set the volume envelope. So we're gonna go here in the amp tab. For the attack, we want something really short, not 0, so that it doesn't sound too robotic. So something between 1 and 4 milliseconds is fine. For the decay time, we're gonna go back to our samples and check the length of the impulse on the 909 clap, for instance. So here, if we take a look at the bottom of the screen, we can see that it's around 11 milliseconds. So let's go back to our snap and choose a value around this. Let's say 12. Hold level 0, release time 0. Leave a bit of hold time here to avoid some tiny clicks. And that's what we have so far. A tiny impulse. One other thing that we could do here is to go to the EQ section and get rid of some low frequencies, low mid frequencies. Like that. Now let's duplicate this to create our second spike. We can do this by right-clicking the voice here, then click duplicate, and we'll get a copy of the first layer here. Let's go back to the time views. What we could do then here is to change those values slightly so that the two impulses don't sound exactly the same. So maybe increasing the attack time here slightly. And as we said earlier, if we go back to our samples, if you take a look at the Vermona clap, the second impulse is really shorter than the first one. So if we go back to OSnap, we could decrease this one to around 8 milliseconds. And then the key here is to adjust the start delay so that these two impulses are offsetted in time. So we saw in the 909 sample that the first two spikes are 12 milliseconds apart. So here we're gonna set this to 12 milliseconds. Again, as we saw on the 908 clap, the spikes get gradually quieter, so we're gonna bring down the volume of this second spike here. So that's with our second spike. Let's duplicate this layer again and do the same thing. So modify the volume envelope slightly, adjust the start delay, and lower its volume. What we could also do with those three impulses is to pan them slightly to the sides. That way we can get a more stereo clap sound. Let's have the first one a bit more centered, and the two subsequent ones a bit more on the sides, like this. And finally the main hit. So let's duplicate that last layer again by right-clicking here, hitting duplicate. As we saw, we're gonna keep the same volume value as the last spike. We're gonna set the start delay of our main hit. You can do this by dragging the elements in the timeline up there. We saw in the 909 samples and 808 samples, as well as the Vermona clap, that the last spike and the main hit are closer together, so let's do just that. The impact of each layer is shown with this tiny line here, so that's a good way to visualize the space between the impact. So here you can see that the last two are closer together. Then we need to set the decay time of this last layer. It needs to have a longer decay, something like 100 milliseconds for starters. Oh yeah, and let's have this one centered. And generally speaking, this decay time value here sets the overall decay of your clap. So if you have a really long one here, so yeah, it's up to you to choose the value which feels right. We need to get rid of some low and mid frequency, so we're gonna add a high pass filter. So we go to the master section here, click EQ, and select the high pass filter for this band. And here we're going to get rid of anything below, let's say, 800 Hertz, something like that. Like this. You can also adjust the brightness of your clap by trimming off some of those high frequency. So set the last band to low pass frequency, and here and then the answer to everything, distortion. So we go to the master drive tab here, toggle on the distortion, you can select the curve that feels right for you, and then it's just a matter of cranking up the input gain. At this point you can also toggle on the clipper on the master, just to control our sound a bit. I'm gonna go back to the drive. And here you can get a good variety of sound just by playing with the drive color knob. Now we have a nice basic drum machine clap. If you want something a bit more original, you could apply this concept by using another kind of sound sources. Let's say samples, for instance. So let's start with a fresh track by clicking the plus button here and then saying yes. That way we have a full reset of our rack. We're gonna add a blank sampler, load a source into it. We're looking for something with a short rise and a single impact. Let's pick this one. And here we're gonna apply the same principles as we just did with the noise sources. I'll fast forward through this since you already know what it's about. So that's the result using only dry samples. We're gonna set the same EQ and drive parameters in the master. Again, the overall pitch of your clap could be determined by the pitch of the last layer. Another thing we can do on top of this to emulate the reverb tail effect that we have on the noise clap is to add a noise layer, sync it to our last layer here, short attack, quite long decay, no hold level, and just use this and mix it so that it's really, it adds a bit of depth to our clap. Without it, with it. Maybe a little less decay time. And we'll use like pure white noise. Like this. Here you can see that I've used the same samples for each spike. You could also play around with other samples, like pick a different samples for each spike. Let's try and do that. Again, short rise and single impact. You'll notice that the samples plays through the current layer, so it's applying the volume envelope. That's why you get those tiny impulses when you preview the new samples. Let's get this one. Let's change the third spike. And again, maybe pan the impulses left and right to get some more stereo. Except for the first spike and the main hit. So this example using the clap synthesis method in conjunction with some samplers is just one of many things you could do. You could also use the Carplus engine in order to get some more digital sounding sounds. You could even apply this technique using the body engine or the granular. I will then show you an example where you can use the granular engine on its own to create a clap. So we start with an empty rack here, and we're going to use the granular engine. So let's load a sample into it. Again, we're looking for something with a short rise and a single impact. Let's use a wooden sound. We need a short fall as well. Okay, let's use this firecrack sound. So one thing you can do with the granular is basically set the number of grains you want to be playing. So let's set this to 4. You can create some variation in the speeds at which the grains play the sample by playing with the pitch variation here. Let's pick something like 30. And you can finally use the random time parameter, which will basically delay the start of some of the grades. And the higher the value, the longer the delay is. So this is a bit too much. This is fine. And here is just a case of playing around with the pitch variation, the random time, and once you feel comfortable, you can add some drive. Let's do this on the master. So go to the drive tab, turn it on, crank up the drive input gain, turn on the master clipper, a bit of EQ, maybe a little bump somewhere. Okay, maybe we need a little more brightness, so let's increase the... There we go. Let's increase the high frequencies. Maybe you want the grains to play a shorter section of the sample, so let's decrease the hold time ratio here, add a bit of release. And that's another way to get a clap-like sound using only the granular engine. Again, feel free to mix those techniques as just showed you. Share the result. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to this channel if you like this kind of content because there's more coming. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.